So if you really want to understand what's going on, you ask them for, their payables and how many days are past due. So what's the biggest indicator? Because the first thing they do is they start extending terms or not paying on time. So if you want to know if somebody's in trouble, you say, well, I want you to tell me what you're aging on your payables.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Cashflow Chronicles Open Forum. I had Kevin Graham on the latest edition you're going to listen to. He's an auto industry veteran, having gone through many obstacles, and shares some tips and tricks, I like to call them war stories, that I think you're going to enjoy because he brings some specific industry experience working for the big three all the way down to the supply chain. Hope you guys enjoy.
Kevin, I appreciate you for jumping on, man. I appreciate you offering some flexibility to bring in and share some war stories and just insights. 'Cause I know you've been in the auto industry for quite a while, right? Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that you're seeing here in the marketplace taking place specifically in the auto sector that perhaps your past could bring in to offer advice on a super high level to start the conversation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Matt, it's great to be here today, and I appreciate it. But you're right, we're at, I would say, an inflection point. If you think back from an auto industry perspective, since 2019, you've got crisis upon crisis. You had COVID, you have microchips, and then you had the invasion of Ukraine, which caused a lot of input prices, especially in Europe, to go up, natural gas. You have the situation with labor. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on there at the same time that you've got a major technology changeover to EVs. So it's a dynamic time, it's an exciting time, but unlike past decades, you've got a lot of stuff going on at the same time.
So in a little bit of a background about you, you've kind of done a majority of roles. I think you name it. You kind of been through.
I've been around the block. I mean, I always like to talk about the fact that I worked full time, went to school. I did that I started pushing carts in the Meyer parking lot, and within a couple of years, I was the youngest hardlines manager in the history of the company at the time. But yeah, I've been a junior accountant, cost accountant, plant controller, finance manager. Numerous purchasing roles, both in the tier one as well as at an OEM. Been a CFO twice, and actually have a company and I'm the CEO of. So yeah, I've been around the block. Also had the opportunity to run a business early on and cleaned it up for a major company called Sandvik. And we sold it, and it was an interesting experience. It was a technology company, but yeah, I've seen a lot, and I always like to say that there's probably not a lot that I haven't seen, but every now and then you still get surprised.
So perfect time to pivot into the most common thing that we hear. The automotive industry is resilient. It goes through so many tips and turns, and auto's auto. So we're kind of at a point now where it's one ball to drop after the other.
Yeah.
Throw in interest rates being where they're at, and all these capital investments the supply chain has to go through. What are some of the tips you have if you're a tier 2 or tier 3 supplier right now and you're going through so many challenges?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things you need to keep your eye on. Interest rates, yes, especially for smaller companies. It's not a lot of times, if you've got a decent bottom line, a pretty solid balance sheet, it's not so much, interest rates have a cost to them, obviously. And managing your working capital is very important. What I see is a lot of tier suppliers, maybe they have less sophisticated systems. They don't have access to capital. When I was at General Motors, people would come to us. And so capital, other than, the cyclicality, and a lot of times the lenders, automotive has not been, the sweetheart spot for a lot of people for a while, but you got to keep a tight rein on your working capital. And it's critical to understand your cash flows. And it's critical to put together whether 13 or 18-week cash flow forecasts and monitor that, because I think the universal truth is companies don't go out of business because they show profit or loss on their income statement. They go out of business because they run out of cash. And so when I worked in GM's risk management group, a lot of times what you saw was people weren't as much focused on cash, they were focused on the top line, and one day they missed payroll, or one day they couldn't make a payment to a supplier and they got shut down.
And I think in my specific role tied to accounts receivables and working capital to help banks lend more, I always see a situation where you're a CFO or a leader, you have a new opportunity, you're going to say yes to this because it's cash coming in the business.
Yeah.
But you don't have the backfill support or the actuarial structure to really...
Well, you're right. And the other thing is finance people in particular, we need to sort of be like Switzerland, right? We need to be agnostic from the perspective of not allowing our emotions on a decision to come into play. The facts need to play out. And it really is going to come down to, is the ROI there? What's the payback? And can the company afford it? And a lot of times what you'll see is everybody gets excited about the top line and the new sales coming, and they just don't necessarily realize that you're going to be spending cash probably up to 3 years before you see that first start of production. And have you managed that, and have you integrated that into a scenario that says, okay, today this is great, we're doing fine, but you talked about the resilience of the auto industry. It can change on a dime.
Yeah.
You know, you think about the banking crisis of 08, 09, and overnight, you know, liquidity dried up and people weren't buying vehicles. So you have to make sure that you're insulated enough. But the most important thing that I've always done is I always make sure, and some people think this is maybe not the right approach, you've got to bring your bankers in. You got to bring whoever is a line of credit in. You've got to be open and honest with them, and you've got to use them as a business partner. A lot of times, if you know you've had that transparency, you've got good business practices, they're going to stand behind you. But hiding and not talking about, you know, bad things going on, that's when they get a little antsy, and then credit committees go sideways, and next thing you know, it's somebody's pulling your line of credit because, you know, you missed a covenant. I've worked places where we've missed covenants. Let's be clear. Numerous places. But I called my business partners and I said, hey, look, we're going to miss this covenant. Can you give me a deviation, or can you give me a get out of jail free card? And I'll be honest with you, 10 times out of 10 they did, because I came to them and then I talked to them about why we missed it and what the plan is to recover, because it's always about the plan. And that goes to the resilience of automotive. Yeah. Any that's been in automotive, we're forged in the crucible of the fires of automotive. And that's why I say there's not a lot I haven't seen, because in automotive you see just about everything, especially working in either an OEM or in the tier supply base.
So 2 things to say off of that. The first is the individuals I have on this Cashflow Chronicles Open Forum platform, they always talk about planning.
Yes.
And the more people you have involved and you're transparent about the challenges you're faced with, it's going to come to fruition. If it's a future turnaround scenario, just take care of it in the front end. And if you're going to have partners like, hey, this is a reality, this is business.
Be upfront, be honest. The other thing I would say about planning is a lot of people plan, and that's great. And they'll think, yeah, we put all together the right assumptions, everything's incredible. Next day, the right assumptions could be wrong. I always recommend having a sensitivity analysis to your planning that says, okay, this is our optimal scenario. This is what we're moving forward with. This is what we're putting the presentation of the bank to, or the presentation of the board or leadership. But what happens if we're off by 5% on some of the key metrics? Always make sure you've got that out there, because it's like now you've got a sensitivity that says, here's some of the upside, here's some of the downside. And then everybody walks in with eyes wide open versus, oh, this is absolutely going to happen. This is our scenario. And then 3 days later, three days later, that's why I say I always have plan A, B, C, and D, because you know what? It never quite always works out the way you thought.
If we do this, we're going to achieve this number based on these inputs that we assume is always going to happen.
That's right. And everyone walks around like, you know, it's written in stone, it's carved in stone. No, the only thing it is in an Excel spreadsheet or a PowerPoint presentation.
And you look at the big 3, they come out with a new product line, let's say, they launch a new product and they have an expected sales volume that's going to come into play. Yeah. And I'm sure you can speak to this as well, let's say. Yeah,
I would say that, in my experience, sales volumes are always one of the toughest things to judge. And the OEMs will come out with their projected volumes, and they'll give use some terminology from one of the OEMs, MCR or
Yep.
LCR. And what the tiers typically will do is they'll use IHS. Okay.
Yeah.
And you need to factor for the fact that yes, it's going to be great if you hit these volumes. That's great. But you've got to figure out how to make sure you've capitalized enough to hit them, but that you've not overcapitalized, because there are times with the cyclicality, and there's sometimes that models, they don't sell. There's nothing wrong with the car. There's nothing wrong with the platform. There's nothing wrong with the styling. They just don't resonate with people, even though the OEMs spend a lot of time, doing outside studies with consumer groups. Sometimes it just doesn't resonate in the marketplace. And you've got to be flexible enough that you've got to sit there and say, well, what if I don't? And that goes to the sensitivity.
Yeah.
What if I don't hit the volume requirements? Did I set up my machinery or my line in such a way it's flexible that I can do something else with it?
I know it's a very cliche business sales term, like good, better, best planning, like always come in with 3 solutions, hey, based on what we said.
Yeah.
Would you say that's a good analogy from a planning standpoint, as far as saying, hey?
Yeah, I mean, if you equate those to what I talked about earlier about having, plan A, plan B, plan C, you always need to have a couple of different scenarios come into play, because if you and I right now knew where FX was going to be, we'd be gaming the market, and instead of talking today, we'd be on the back of our 80-foot Carvers or something, in Monte Carlo and sipping beer and wine. So, if we always knew what the future was going to be and you could predict it, that would be great, but it doesn't happen that way. So you've got to plan, what happens if it's good, better, best, or, plan A, B, C, D, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I built this perfect methodology to achieve these goals that we have to achieve,
we'd be billionaires right now.
Absolutely.
Because we would know what the stock for NVIDIA is going to be 3 weeks from now.
I had you on to actually tell me how to do that. Come on.
There we go.
So I think one thing we hear quite a bit is the OEMs control everything down the pipeline, whether it be Stellantis, GM, or Ford, to be fair to everybody, and Kia, Hyundai. I've always been told they don't have much leverage to negotiate to them. Let's say if there's financial challenges.
Well, I'm going to say this, okay? And I've been on both sides as a purchasing professional in an OEM and then in a tier 1 in a capacity where we needed some relief. If you ship quality on time, okay, and you run into an issue, it's not going to be easy, okay? It's never easy because, in a way, what you're saying is if you signed a contract, the contract, you're asking for some relief on the contract. In my experience, they're reasonable people because there's also a cost from the OEM's perspective of having to lift up and move tools. And if you've got somebody that's shipping on time to quality, and I'm going to make you're on a fixed price contract and the price of TPO is doubled because of, oil shortages or some type of oil disruptions, and you're not on an escalation, de-escalation. Some of the OEMs have indexing for certain key commodities. You need to go with a rational reason why you're looking for it, and you need to work through their process. And sometimes that process ends you up in their risk management team. Sometimes the purchasing organizations handle it themselves, but you're going to have a very difficult time talking about how you need more money if you don't ship on time, you don't have quality, and you don't know how to manage your business.
I guess to tie into the transparency thing we were talking about, in your experience, has that further developed relationships?
Yeah, nobody likes to be surprised.
Yeah.
And the OEMs, the purchasing teams, they have business targets. They have targets that they got to meet certain deliverables. And if all of a sudden everything's, because again, what are they saying? They're seeing on time, quality. Everything seems good. Now, the OEMs do have mechanisms by which they have third parties, it depends on who they are, that will look at financial health, and suppliers are required periodically to submit their financials. But a lot can happen in a quarter, a lot can happen in 6 months, and sometimes the cadence, if you're on a watch list, you have to submit it more frequently. But if you're somebody that there hasn't been any signs of problems, there's nothing that's going on, maybe it's annual, and letting them know what's going on, it's scary because the sales guys are all going to be reticent about, well, I don't know if we want to go talk to them. And the last thing you want to not do is shut down a plant, because what happened was you couldn't get a raw material because you were 60, 90, 80 days past due, whatever the story was. They're going to find out anyway. I'll be honest with you. When I was in the risk management team, I had more people calling me about one of their competitors having issues, because even though it's a large industry, it's sort of small. A lot of people know a lot of people. And if somebody's not paying on time, the word gets around. So if you think that by not talking about it, you're going to be able to keep it covered up, it's not going to happen. So again, it's a tough call. It can sometimes work in your favor, and sometimes it's not going to work in your favor. But the last thing you want to do is shut down someone, especially an OEM, because they measure the shutdown time in tens of thousands of dollars per minute versus, so you shut down any assembly plant, okay, and you could have a pretty big bill in just a matter of minutes.
Because they have the ultimate control.
Well, what typically happens in those cases, if you they can just debit you. So if they owe you, if they owe you $1 million, they can just go in and debit. And a lot of times the shutdown costs are debited from the plants, and they can do that. And then what happens is if you get in that situation, then you got to sit there and go back and try to reverse the debit and do stuff like that. The best thing to do is be honest and open, to sit there and talk about the situation. No different, there's scorecards. All the tiers have scorecards. But if you've got a good relationship with the purchasing people, if you got a good relationship with the plant that you're shipping to, if you got a good relationship with your customers in general, that's always good business sense versus them getting surprised and then one of their bosses says, well, we don't need these people anymore, find me an alternative.
Yeah, because they're just a supplier, you have no relationship.
Well, there are some suppliers that are more difficult to resource, right?
Yeah.
And that's another thing. When you're a tier one, it's important to understand where you have leverage. So if you've got a process or you've got something that requires extreme validation, it becomes sort of a cat and mouse game. Does an OEM, and again, if you're shipping with quality on time, then it's like, do we want as an OEM to take a risk on a $5 part, and I'll make it up, on a $100,000 Navigator, to take a supply chain risk by moving it, having to build a bank because you just can't shut down a line. There's some things you can do. If it's a shoot and ship part, you can pull the mold and have something the next day. But sit there and move the entire process. You got to build a bank. You got to do a lot of stuff. So there's an inherent risk of moving. And the question is the inherent risk of moving from a financial perspective doesn't align with the price increase? And a lot of times, if you're not priced properly, sometimes maybe they bought the business and they go out in the marketplace, it could cost them actually more than granting you the price increase. So all this stuff is going on in the background. And again, understanding who you are, understanding your margins. I mean, if you're somebody that's is losing money at the direct material line, and it's a commodity you buy in the marketplace, they're not going to find it any cheaper. If you're losing it at, maybe the contribution margin, okay, well, there's a little bit more behind it. You got direct labor and so on and so forth. If you're fairly productive, they're not going to find it cheaper. But knowing your product, knowing your competitors, knowing how you are in the marketplace is going to be important when you go in for a price increase. When I worked for a tier one, I remember the first day. So I was there, and what happened was they were losing money. And they didn't have a plant profitability report or a cost of goods sold report that could tell you, what product line was losing or making money. And I remember clearly sitting down with the president and the sales guys, and they said, well, we know this customer we're making all sorts of money on, and it's probably someplace else. After we got down a couple months, we put together a plant profitability report, and guess what, Matt? The person that they thought they were making money with was where they were losing money. And I actually went to that particular OEM and asked for a price increase. I remember clearly talking to the sales guys because they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to damage the relationship.
100%.
They said, we'll send in our crazy CFO. I remember going into the negotiations, asking them, I need to know if there's any skeletons in the closet. Did we shut these guys down? Are we crap on quality? Just tell me all the skeletons, because they're going to know them, and they're going to come out in that meeting, and they're going to be impediments from us getting to point A to point B, and that's making money.
A lot of stuff there, and I think it comes from an experience standpoint. There's so many examples in real life.
Yeah.
I think one thing, I hear this a lot, and it could be automotive and just in general, is when you're those big tier, like word of mouth spreads very quickly.
Word
if
of
you
mouth
don't pay,
spreads. Yeah.
things like that. You'd be surprised, and this is kind of a play into what I do with trade credit insurance, how many companies don't get financials from their customers.
Yeah.
I'm seeing this on a daily basis right now, which is unfortunate. Companies decline in sales from 30 million to 10 million in a year.
Yep.
And
Or in a quarter, like we talked about, because it can turn just like that.
we're just dealing with so much changes right
Yeah.
now. It's a lot of companies, due to tariffs and things like that, are holding off on decisions.
Yeah.
If you don't get financials, that kind of gives you a little bit of a red flag.
Yeah.
And it speaks of transparency. Hey, I'm
It
working
does.
through some
It does.
challenges.
It does, and it's a situation where it should be one of your warning signs.
Yeah.
Because now sometimes people are reluctant to do it, especially private equity doesn't like to hand
100%.
it out. And you know that. You and I have had that discussion on numerous occasions. But what's important is it will automatically make people think something bad is going on. Because maybe they're hearing chirping, or maybe there's some noise out there. You ask to sit down, and they say everything's fine, and it's like, no. You know, this is what we're hearing. Help us out. And you know, it's fascinating. But what I would say, and this is what so I would do these. I used to have to do these, and I've done them in numerous things. And everybody asks for financials. You don't really, I mean, financials are fine, but remember, they're sort of a longer view. They may have audited financials from the last quarter. Some of these companies may only do them once a year, so they may be stale. So if you really want to understand what's going on, you ask them for, their payables and how many days are past due. So what's the biggest indicator? Because the first thing they do is they start extending terms or not paying on time. So if you want to know if somebody's in trouble, you say, well, I want you to tell me what's your aging on your payables.
Yeah, and that's real time versus past
That's real
due.
time versus you may have something from the past, because if they don't have cash, the first thing they're going to do, they're going to have to continue to make payroll, right?
Yep.
Because they need to get product out the door. So what you'll typically see is the prioritization will go from, it'll be payroll, it'll be stuff like anything that can shut them down. So raw material, direct suppliers, where you'll typically see the slippage is in the indirect. Like they didn't pay the landlord on time, or they didn't pay, the office supply company. So you'll start seeing that slippage because people aren't stupid.
Yeah.
They're going to prioritize. And I know we don't use checks anymore per se, but they're going to do the check game in those areas
in the mail.
that are going to have the least impact to their ability to continue to make product and get out the door. So there's certain categories of suppliers from a payables perspective that you'll see the slippage first, and you'll say, okay, what's going on here? And that'll be your flag. And then as it gets worse, they'll start have to rationalizing some of the production, payables.
And tracking bankruptcies on a daily basis like I do right now, it's amazing to look at the financials, where they're paying their bills.
Yeah, that's exactly. Or how late they're paying them.
Yeah, and then the companies that are, I don't want to call it lazy, but just more of like, oh, they're good for it.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, I see that a lot, because if you've got a long-term relationship
100%.
with a supplier, like you're tier one and you've bought from a resin supplier for years and you've been on time, they're going to give you a little bit of leeway. But that leeway that I've seen in the marketplace has changed. And the reason it's changed is everybody's squeezed right now, okay? And everyone's operating on tighter margins. So, if you're operating in the 5 or 6% EBITDA range, that's pretty tight, okay? And what you'll see is the ability to carry people, the ability to find alternative sources and solutions is hindered just because you're running on such tight margins, and everybody's running on tight margins.
Yeah, no one can afford late payments.
Well, they can't. Well, yeah, you can't, because there were suppliers where, because of the relationship. And I don't want to sit here and tell people how to game this, but first of all, most flags are set from a receivable perspective to trip after 30 days.
Yeah.
So 30 days past terms, 30 days past due. Some companies are at 60. You may not even be on the radar if you've taken another 15-day terms on these people, because the metrics in there are typically set for, hey, we're gonna start asking questions after your 30 days past due terms, and you just picked up 15 days of working capital, because now let's say your terms are 60 and you're pushing 75, they won't even recognize it from a metric perspective until you get to 90. So there's ways of doing that, but if you're beyond 30 days, you start showing up, depending on the company, on the no-no list.
Well, and it's also playing the AR game with preferential payments and things like that too.
Well, it's that, and then there's a lot of things out there.
Yeah.
And what I've seen a lot is now the philosophical discussion of when the clock starts.
Yeah.
So my personal feeling is the clock starts when I receive it. Now, there's different terms out there, but sometimes they're nebulous, and sometimes your T's and C's have it spelled out easily. But if I'm shipping, I'm going to invoice the day I ship. And if it's 5 days on the truck, then I'm going to be 5 days later, because I'm going to receive it 5 days later, and they're going to think I'm already 5 days in the clock, and I'm going to say, no, I'm at day 0. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and that's where you got to make sure you have alignment, and you've got to make sure that you've got robust, if it's FOB, ship point or destination point, you got to make sure you understand when the clock starts for your terms.
Yeah, disputes happen quite a bit in my world too.
Disputes happen all the time. Yeah.
So I feel like we could talk forever about this, and you have 8 million ideas, which are incredibly insightful. And I think after this, people will be reaching out to you to potentially offer your insight, which I believe we encourage, because you're such a kind individual, but you're only one person. So
yeah, that's okay.
So with electrification, autonomous, these new models that are coming out, what are some potential blind spots you see in the future if you're in the automotive supply chain right now, as every company tries to plan 5 years or even 2 years down the road?
Yeah, I mean, the adoption rate of EV is a big thing. And batteries have come down in cost significantly. Range anxiety is coming down. But if you look around, there's really not the infrastructure yet, as well as the time. If I go to the gas station, I fill up, boom, there's gas stations just about in every corner. There's not electrical chargers in every corner, and there's not fast chargers everywhere. So I think you've got to be very careful about looking at the marketplace and looking at the adoption rate. For some reason, I just recently read an article, some of the EV, people are surprised that Americans are not embracing EV as like some other countries. And I think in Norway, it's like the majority of the vehicles sold now are EV. We go back and forth with changes in government, and those make changes in policy, whether it's EV credits, whether it's clean energy. I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just saying it's a fact that, as administrations change, each one has a little bit different focus. And so that is something that's on the horizon. So again, you've got to make sure that you understand the market more than somebody comes to you and says, we're going to sell 200,000 EV or Lightning Ford F-150s or Chevys, or there's going to be, although I love the Hummer, a beautiful looking vehicle, everybody's going to be driving a Hummer at 105 a pop. Yeah. But you got to be pragmatic that way. And fortunately for the tier suppliers, and it changes depending on the industry, there are some tier suppliers that are agnostic to technology. Okay, meaning the propulsion system doesn't wag their vehicle sales one way or the other.
Yep.
I look at the interior business, whether it's a company like Forvia or IAC or Grupo, they do interiors. Some of them do other things as well, but they're agnostic to use the term autonomous. So I would always joke about it, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's electric, whether it's internal combustion engine, or Fred Flintstone's 2 feet. You need to have an interior. People need to sit someplace. And so there are certain segments where you're agnostic to the propulsion system and it doesn't really affect you. If I was somebody that was in ICE, there's companies out there, that have a lot of ICE, whether it's transmission parts, cams, cranks, whatever it is, then you need to have a broader perspective on things. And if you're 100% internal combustion, then you need to ask yourself, what's our end game 20 or 25 years down the road? Should we diversify? Because right now we do cams or cranks, and there's not going to be cams or cranks. Or we do rear axles from the perspective of, sending energy from a propulsion system, the rear axle, versus having 2 motors mounted in the back. So you need to have that longer term horizon. And I think companies, obviously like American Axle, Linamar, Magna, I know they're looking at stuff like that, and they were in the past, heavily invested in this kind of space. So it's something to think about from a long-term horizon perspective.
Yeah, just how much...
Or ZF or some of these other that would do transmissions. Yeah.
And how much capital they have tied into their existing infrastructure. It's a longer-term play.
In a way, and this is going to sound maybe counterintuitive, as the OEM shift from internal combustion to EV, there's going to be less and less investment in new internal combustion technology. Doesn't mean they're not going to invest.
Yep.
But the curve's going to shift. So you could get a situation where you're in an ICE capacity, and you're going to have a component that maybe you don't have to do anything but find efficient ways of manufacturing for the next 10, 15 years, because the design's not going to change. So there may be an opportunity to actually increase the bottom line because there's not as much engineering R&D effort going, because the next technological leapfrog in internal combustion isn't going to happen in internal combustion. It's going to happen with something that's different, like hydrogen fuel cells, or we talked about pure EV electric vehicles.
Much like the A, B, C, D planning.
Yeah.
Hey, we're in ICE right now, but let's invest in these other options.
Yeah, I can tell you that RCA, as vacuum tubes were dying and being replaced with transistors, they had some of their best years because they did not have to invest in new vacuum tube technology. They just kept making the same vacuum
fulfill
tubes.
Fulfill our current technology and keep things going.
Exactly.
So I really enjoyed the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to leave with an insight for everyone listening, or how can we help you all together within the community?
I think the best thing from a finance professional perspective is always be open. Come always with fact-driven conversations. I see a lot of times finance professionals that are trying to eat, let's say you've done an analysis and you think you're 90% there. And you'll double the length of time in the analysis to get that extra 2 or 3 percentage points. It's not worth it. Things change so dramatically. Have logical arguments to your business cases. Make sure they're grounded in fundamentals that are supportable, and be a true business partner to the operations. It's funny, you would be surprised how much, once the operations people recognize the fact that you can be a business partner. I've worked places where it's like, the finance people are thought of like mall cops, are just there to bust me for like loitering too long at JCPenney's or in the food court. So if you're in a position, and anyone can do this, you can do it as a junior analyst, you can do it as a finance manager, director, CFO, make sure that you're helping to teach your business partners, whoever they are, what finance means and how finance can help. and be that partner for them. You always have to make sure that you are somebody that's challenging the organization in a professional way, but bring that business savvy, bring that business acumen so that you can use data and information to help versus, be perceived as someone that's just going to walk in and say, I missed my numbers this month. I would never walk into any of my bosses and say so-and-so missed their numbers. I would walk in with that business partner after that person, her or he, and I sat down and said, okay, we're going to have to go tell, the CEO that we missed our numbers. What's our plan? How are we going to recover? And you walk in together, and that's how it works.
I think if you don't plan, you plan to fail. And anyone that comes in with a problem, I always tell everyone, well, so what?
Yeah.
How are we going to find the solution?
You and I can report out on problems all day long, but what people are looking for is identification of the problem, yes. But what are we going to do to fix it? What's the solution? Because if you're just bringing problems and not solutions, they'll probably find somebody else.
And I think as a leader, you appreciate that too, because you're one person. You rely on those individuals that know their role and responsibilities better.
Yeah, and if you're comfortable with them, and it could be something as simple if somebody comes to me with a problem, it's like I may say, well, I want periodic updates, or come back to me when it's fixed. The best thing any leader in a high position can do is not ask who did it, and I always shy away. The natural instincts is, well, who screwed up? I need a name.
Of course.
We've got a wall, we got the back wall, for the firing squad.
Oh, I got an email from
outside.
the CFO. I don't know.
That's right. And it's like, it's really about, you can get to that later because maybe that's a training issue. Maybe somebody needs some additional support. You don't know the real, but what can we put in place to either mitigate or make that go away from a process perspective? So it's one last thing that has to be out there diverting the scarce resources of an organization.
100%. I really appreciate your time, and it was some great insights you're bringing into the table, and I think everyone's going to gain value from this time spent. So
thanks, Matt.
Thank you so much,
Appreciate
Kevin.
it. It was great. Great talking to you.